My name is Anna Kavanagh, and in studio with me is Colin Ward from Legan in County Longford to talk to us about rural electrification. Good morning, Colin.
Good morning, Anna.
And thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Young people today have no idea what it was like to live without electricity. I know that you have very early childhood memories of what it was like to have no light. Would you like to tell me a bit about that, please?
Yeah, I have a recollection of our house and our neighbourhood not having electricity. And I have a clear recollection of a lot of other houses. An aunt of mine that lived away that never had electricity. She left there in her home in 1976, and they didn't have electricity at all because her husband wouldn't, as I say, get it in when it did come around.
Yes.
But there were different reasons that the vast majority of people did get electricity when the rural electrification came into being in the mid-50s. But there were a few people, some 10–15% maybe, that didn't get it for different reasons. Yes. One would be that they thought they mightn't be able to afford it, and that would be the case. And then other people were afraid of it.
Yes.
They thought they might burn the house or whatever.
Yes.
Other people weren't afraid of it. And then there were areas that the electricity didn't go initially, because it might be very remote and there wouldn't be enough houses really to justify it. And the terrain could be difficult. There could be rock and whatever, difficult for poles, because at that time poles were nearly all hand dug by hand. So for that reason, everybody didn't get it just then, but they would have got it. There were people not far from me that didn't get it initially, but they got it a few years later.
Right, Colin. And can you tell me now what it was like living in a house without electricity?
Well, you see, everything at the time you didn't know any different. You see, so but the house, when the difference of when it did come was the house, the kitchen and everything was so dark. You'd wonder how people managed. And I visited my aunt quite often, and you see they had still the oil lamp, and they had and everything then, of course, was very basic outside of that.
Right. So the house was lit by oil lamps. Were there oil lamps in all the rooms?
No, not all rooms either. You had to probably take the oil lamp from the kitchen when you were going to bed in some cases, and take it up to the rooms.
Right.
We did have a nicer one then for us to say the parlour, the sitting room, whatever. That was lit at Christmas and special occasions, and if the
right. And
that was sorry.
It must have been very difficult for women in those days then, trying to work without it.
It would be very difficult. That's why people at that time, their eyesight was affected so much, obviously, because they were trying to sew and they were trying to read and everything, with the poor light that was there. So like that, there were a lot of people, that time there wouldn't be the same way of getting your eyes looked after as well.
Right.
But I remember my mother actually, my father, rather, he used to read the paper with the help of a flash lamp.
Oh, right.
So... yeah,
so that's quite interesting.
That's right, yeah.
But getting back now to, say, the woman of the house, how did she manage to cook, to iron, to wash without electricity? Yeah,
she cooked a lot on the, people, there would have been ranges beginning, maybe some people might have had a range, but not the majority of it would be on the hard stone that time.
Yes.
And even when the electricity did come first, it would gradually, people moved on into the appliances, different things when they got plugs in and they got a range in that heated water and all that, That would have all come a bit later, you see. Gradually all those things came in.
Right.
So people were still using a lot of the old ways of, say, cooking and whatever, or ironing clothes in the old way.
And how did they iron the clothes?
They ironed the clothes with an iron that the iron was just, it looked the very same as the electric iron that we know today. But it had to be heated by, there was a gadget, it was an iron brick thing,
right.
And it was put into the fire, and it was heated there until it was red hot.
Right.
And then it was put into the iron then, and there was a way you closed it off, and she ironed away then with that while it was hot.
And
so that had to be very hot, or otherwise she'd be, she often heard my mother saying, "Oh, the iron isn't hot enough at all. We'd have to put it back in the fire again." Because if you hadn't a real good fire for a good length of time, it wouldn't have got up enough heat to last while she did all the clothes in the house. You can imagine a big family to try and get it. And if you had wet turf, or as they used to say, puck turf, your trousers would have to go, they would have been ironed.
So, yeah, isn't that amazing? So you could practically take hours and hours to iron.
Oh, you could do, yeah, you could do, yeah. And then, you hadn't an electric kettle, like even, plugs or anything,
So
because a lot of people didn't even get in when the electricity did come, they just got the basic lights here and there, you know.
Okay, so you mentioned that
I tell you, sorry.
Sorry.
The one clear recollection is my school, my local school, actually didn't have they didn't have lights. When the electricity came around, they had one plug, one socket, in, as they say, the master's room, and that was all they had. They never had lights. I left primary school in 1963, and there was no lights, no lights.
No lights whatsoever?
No lights. So you had a dark day. And
so, and not even a lamp, I'm sure, because it would have been dangerous.
Oh yeah, no. The room, you know, you had to make do. Because I remember the teacher had been new when he wasn't there for less than a year before I left.
Yes. And
he talked about we'd have to get lights in here, you know. So I don't know many years after that, the lights came into the school, but actually the primary school didn't. They had a plug that you could boil a kettle in, and that was the height of it. Whatever the idea of that was.
That's amazing.
It's amazing, yeah.
So if we just move it forward then to the actual coming of the light, what was it like in the run-up to rural electrification?
The run-up was all the talk, as to say, all the talk in the countryside and villages of this the coming. You see, funny that time, very few people referred to it as the electricity coming.
Right.
It was referred to as the light.
Right.
Are you getting in the light? Are you taking the light? You know, people were wondering, are you taking the light? So I have a memory of the chap coming round to take the applications or to interview people to see what they were interested in taking it in the first place. And he would ask, and my father would ask, what's the price of it? What's the ground rent, as to say, you know, the standing charge, in other words. The ground rent it was referred to. So that was all, they were questioned on that, and everybody then, so you said yes or no, and some said, well, we'll wait for another while, you know.
Right.
And then that was the first of it.
And do you remember then the men coming to put up the poles?
I remember that clearly, yeah. I remember the men, it was very labour intensive. Very labour intensive, because it was all done manually, all done by hand. All those poles that you see in the countryside, the older ones, where you live down the main line, the main power line there, they were all dug by hand.
That's amazing.
It is, yeah.
And did they not have any kind of machinery at all?
They had very, very little machinery. A lorry would come with the poles, all right, and leave them on some of them in the summertime, if the ground was good enough, they would be able to drive down through some fields, and they had to be taken off by hand. And others were left on the side of the road, and they were brought into the fields by horses.
Right.
Horses pulled them in with chains into the field, and they pulled them round about. That's how they got them to the site, like where they would be erected.
That's amazing. And when it came to the actual erection of the poles, how did they manage to do that?
They erected that by manpower, like, you know, about maybe I don't know how many, 5, 6 people could be under the pole on their shoulders. They had they would erect the pole, they would move it up, and as I worked in the P&T, I knew sort of later how it was done. Like, you would have maybe 6 people lined up along the pole, and they pushed it up a bit, and the chap at the back moved up to the front. And sometimes they would have a guy with a spade at the back that took the weight as the man moved up, he took the weight. So that way of doing it was right. It was very hard. It wasn't
very hard.
And all their shoulders, their jackets or whatever. I don't think they had overalls supplied at that time. Their jackets would be all, you know, the Creo that was in the poles. You could see that on the shoulder of every man's jacket.
Very hard, difficult work.
Yeah, it was hard. Yeah.
Now.
But at those days, I suppose, as to say, people knew how to work. They were used to manual labour, but like that doesn't say that it was.
It was tough.
Yeah.
Now, the great moment. When the light was switched on in your house.
Yeah,
can you tell me about that day, please?
Yeah, I can tell it really, yeah. Of course, the wiring of the countryside after the poles went up was the next big thing, you know, they were running out wire. But I remember clearly the day that the house has been wired and everything ready, the finish thing, everything put in place up to that. And then there was a man who had his job was to put in the fuse, the main fuse that put it in, and I can clearly, well, it was a Saturday he came round. He was dressed in a jacket and trousers, he was, you know. Yes. He came round, he put in the fuse, and it was in the middle of the day, so we switched on the light. But of course we thought on what we were expecting, but we didn't see any difference, obviously, because it was late. Yes. But when the evening came then, around 6 o'clock, and I remember my mother saying clearly, she said, in the name of God, we'll switch it on.
Right.
And she switched on the light, and it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable to see the whole change in the place. We could see everything in the kitchen. You could see this thing. It was total transformation. Yeah.
Amazing.
Amazing, yeah. And the way people were fascinated by this. Oh, goodness, she said, look at all the cobwebs, look at all the stuff and dirt here and there that we couldn't see before.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. But that was the way we settled down to it then, and, you know.
And you mentioned earlier that the changes that came about then were quite gradual. People weren't in a mad rush to go out and buy electrical appliances.
Exactly.
What would have been the first electrical appliance?
Because, you see, lights were the basic thing. That's what people got in. And in our house anyway, there might have been more people got, depending on how better off they were. And they would have got in maybe plugs and things like that. But in our house anyway, well, we don't need a light there. The landing is there, you know what I mean? Well, sure, the light will shine out of the room, won't it? Right. And we put on that light, it'll shine from one room to the other. Right. It'll do things like that. So we'll just get the minimum. We got a nice shade for the parlour, for the sitting room, you see, the parlour. There was a nice shade, good at. I remember my mother picking a shade, like, even for that, you know? So that was, it added to the room. Those little extra, would be regarded then as luxuries. But that was the way it was. Everybody, and then gradually after that, then you moved on into getting a socket in, a plug for an electric kettle and all that, you know?
Yes.
Like my brother worked in the electrical area, and he was able to actually, he was the one that put in the first plugs in the house and said two-way switches, you know what I mean? That you could switch it on before you went upstairs and switch it off when you went into bed or got up, you know. That was a big change too.
That was amazing. There was something now that we didn't mention, was the fact that without electricity you couldn't have running water in the house.
Yeah, in cases you had hot water anyway. Running water, yeah, a lot of people had, well, they had pumps and they had a tank and things like that, you know. They built a tank and collect rainwater.
Right.
Yeah, but there's just one thing on the people who, as the devices went in, like, we lived close to, as to say, a big house, a house that were able to maybe afford a maid and that sort of thing, and they got in a huge amount of stuff straight away after that, like a washing machine, electric kettle, electric iron, all of those things. So my father and myself, I remember as a child going up to the house with my father one day, and the maid there showed him all the different things that got in. And the fascinating thing was, which fascinated him, and even me too, then, was a Hoover. She had a Hoover. They had all those things. They had a Hoover. So she switched on the Hoover in the room to show us the way the Hoover worked. And of course the bag on it that time, you remember the bag that was on them, you know, where you collect the dust. Yes. The bag, you see, as she switched it on, blew up like a balloon, you see.
Yes.
You know what I mean? To let in the dust. And then when she switched it off, it went down like as if you let the wind out of a balloon, you know. And I was fascinated with this, and so was he, and he was saying, and where does the dust go now, you know? Where does all that go? Oh, she said, you empty it when, you know, it gets fairly full, you know? Right, isn't that marvellous, he said. So that was,
isn't that amazing?
The Hoover was the fascinating thing to him and me at the time.
Yes, and I know, Colin, that you lived on a farm, you grew up on a farm. So the coming of the electricity brought huge changes to the farmyard. Well, first of all, you didn't need a lamp to go out and
that's right, yeah, that's right.
You could have a light in the yard.
As I was saying, we got it gradually. It was, you know, my father would say now and again, God, we've all the lights inside, I want a light out here, you know. And then the stable, as I said, the shed or the cow byre, that moved on then, and we got lights into that, and that helped there. But like, a lot of people didn't have enough, say, milking machines came on, and that was huge for a lot of people. But for some people, they didn't really have enough cows to justify the cost of it. So the hand milking was still done, you know, for a good while.
Yes, well, just picking up that point about milking machines. So there would have been a mettle of men working on the large dairy farms, milking cows by hand.
There was indeed,
so now, were they made redundant?
Yeah, there were through time. Yeah, there were. I remember a few of those people that were. They weren't exactly, when they came old, when they came on to say, a pension age or whatever, if there was a son coming on, you know, the son in the farm, well, that was a way of, a sort of a natural sort of a progression, really, you know, that the man didn't have to be made redundant, but, and the son came on, so it just took its own course, sort of thing.
It took its own course,
yeah.
In 1946, one of the most important pieces of our national planning was put underway when work was begun on rural electrification. This is a scheme to bring the benefits of power to the large but scattered communities living outside the towns and villages. A large undertaking, it involves the raising of 1.5 million poles to carry thousands of miles of cable. This rural network will eventually supply over 250,000 farms and other dwellings. More than a third of these consumers have already been connected, and working parties are constantly in action, pushing the job to completion in all parts of the country. The scheme will mean an easier way of life in rural homes, and not only by giving heat and light. The drudgery of pumping and carrying water will gradually disappear, as the electric pump brings modern sanitation to thousands of isolated dwellings. A good supply of water is useful for all sorts of jobs on the farm, and here again the electric pump plays an important part. Quite apart from the saving in labour, a plentiful helping of water actually increases production among dairy cattle and other farm stock.
Rural electrification in Longford more or less coincided with the coming of the television and the opening of RTE. So can you remember the television, the early days of television?
I can remember the early days of television, definitely. Again, as just like the electricity, everybody didn't have a television straight away, you know. But people actually had, you see, that was the thing about it. There were a few people, the house I was telling you about, the big houses to say, they would have had a television pretty early on, you know, maybe the end of the 50s, maybe 3 or 4 years after electricity came about.
Yes.
That time we didn't have RTE, but they had UTV and BBC.
Right, yes.
So we went up to see, we were invited up at certain times to see the BBC, to see television, you see. So we had BBC and UTV. You had something I remember. The first thing you seen was the Perry Como show.
Imagine that.
Yeah, the Perry Como. It would have been 1958, because I'll tell you how I know that. The night that I saw television first, I think the National Song Contest, the British National Song Contest was on, and it was the people that won it, I think, were just in at the end of it anyway, but Perry Como show was on then. But the news, when the news came on, the television cameras were in the hospital in Munich interviewing members of the Manchester United team that had been involved in the crash a few days earlier, the Munich disaster, when the plane crashed in Munich. That was the first, I remember people being interviewed, some in beds, some that weren't too bad in their suit, walking around the ward, and they sat on the bed and whatever, and then there was others, because obviously weren't well enough to be interviewed. But that's the memory you have of that.
Yeah,
so that's what electricity would have brought.
Yes.
And then, of course, in 1963, wasn't it, 62, the RTE came on, yeah.
Yes.
So that's when we moved up in the world.
Yes, isn't that amazing that, you know, it's something that we overlook, that without electricity, you wouldn't really have known that much what was going on in the world. So the coming of electricity actually connected a rural area in Longford to the whole world and to world events. That's quite amazing.
I think the radio, even before that, battery radio, like, was something that changed. A lot of people said that's a change in the world now, you know.
Yes.
But it changed, yeah, of course it did. It brought, you know, people would, then maybe, as I said earlier, they would have had a bill that they didn't have had before that.
Yes.
So they had to deal with that, you know. That's the start of that, yeah.
It might have connected us with the wider world, but I'm inclined to think that perhaps there's a disconnect, because before television, before radio, people went alien in each other's houses, playing cards and having house music and dance. And then with the coming of television, people were inclined to stay at home and not visit each other's houses. Was that your experience?
That was too, yeah. But there was a lot of people who didn't have as I said earlier, that I said earlier, that they didn't, for different reasons, have electricity. But they came into the houses then, funny enough, to avail of some of the things that electricity brought, you know. Right. I mean, you had a radio, there might have been an odd battery radio out before that. But even, you know, even in the 60s when television came on, people might come in and they might see, just to see the television and that, you know. So there would have, yeah, there would have been, but there would have been a lot of people dependent on each other so much that time, and there was so much people in the countryside, and they worked together, and, you know, as everything was manually done, you didn't have a machine of any description, never mind electricity, so you had to chip in, the neighbours had to all come in together and work together, yeah.
Well now, Colin, it has been most interesting hearing that story about rural electrification in Longford, and thank you very much for coming into the studio.
My pleasure, Anna, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this fascinating account of rural electrification in County Longford.